Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a company dedicated to improving quality of life for older adults by giving them the gift of hearing. Today, I'm joined by Stefano Selorio, the CEO of Carevocacy. Stefano is one of the good ones, and I've gotten to know him pretty well over the last year or so after he had reached out after I posted something, and he had learned I was in the Miami area at one point and dropped everything to drive 2 hours to come meet me in person. And I think he just did that to make sure that I was real. But Stefano is one of the good ones, and he's just got an awesome story and really love what he's doing and wanted to bring him on here to kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. And thanks for joining me today, Stefano.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Matt. It's I definitely did not expect your height when I first met you, because I think the first conversation we had was literally on LinkedIn and then on a Zoom call, like just like this. And then when I met you in Miami, right around that time, yeah, literally like a month later or a few months later, it was really a great time. And one, you're one of the good ones because you're one of the people that actually inspired me to create some of the things that I've done with Carevocacy when I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do and in that kind of like stealth mode as a startup.
Amazing. And in case people are wondering, he did mention my height. I am 5'11 3/4. And my old dating apps where I did meet my wife, would say 6 foot. So for the record.
Yeah. Anything above mine is like a taller person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. So Stefano, I think one of the cool things about you is, you started this company being an undergrad student. So what got you interested in age tech that led you to ultimately start Carevocacy?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. It's something that I've found always myself answering. And I feel like it's a very common answer for a lot of people who started something like this. A few years back, I started taking care of my grandma who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I'm not the only caregiver in the family. It's everybody that's involved in it. And so for a while, I was just kind of going through school, work, and just dealing with, just the day and day of taking care of grandma. And I was currently working at a marketing, at a technical industrial company as a marketing person. And, the upcoming school year was coming up. And I knew I had to make adjustments to my work schedule, to school, and a lot of the things I had to be responsible for. And for some reason, I started thinking about like what I wanted to be in like the next 5 years. Did I want to be in marketing all the time, or did I want to develop or create something? And so for that summer, I started looking into just all around caregiving, because I think it was also a difficult part of me of like trying to figure out like how I would balance this. And maybe there was a technology component that would, get involved with that. And that's where I stumbled upon, companies that we may know now, such as like Papa and Honor and all these kind of national, very high valued companies now, but then also Eversound and others who I kind of was around that like peripheral area of like senior living and age tech, and stumbled upon a lot of resources. And I literally spent about like a year and a half in my junior year, just trying to figure out like the whole space, the industry, the little categories that are involved in it. Like just, I'm sure Matt, like there's so many companies in here, like whether it be like the platform side of it, of managing senior living, whether it be from a technology-based perspective or the services, there's just so much like involved in it. And so I spent a lot of months really just figuring out like what I wanted to build. And then came across like a local competition to test out my initial idea of Carevocacy, and won that one. And it was a great validation. Who knew that there were a lot of people who had to deal with their elderly loved ones and how to take care of it and all these other things. And then around 2019, December 2019, I pivoted the original idea from what was similar to what Papa is now, to tech education for older adults, because ultimately I just felt like I was just trying to figure out like what was the real base underlying problem with a lot of the companies in the space, but then also like what are the things that we're ignoring every day, which was just the lack of digital literacy amongst our older adults. And as you probably know, and we all lived through it, March 2020 came around the next coming year, and it was a lot of pivots. So that's just kind of like, I guess, a very quick summary in the sense of like how I started and why I got into thinking about older adults in the age tech space.
No, it's awesome. And yeah, you've had to go through a lot of different different things over the last few years here, and couldn't imagine
Literally.
going through all that. Yeah. And and we're gonna jump around here a little bit, Stefano, because I know you just have a wealth of knowledge in a lot of different categories.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in this industry, especially, of course, senior living, we talk about the staffing crisis where people are looking for more opportunities for various people to kind of hop in and join and start working. And, being a college student yourself, like, how do we attract more college students to become interested in jumping into age tech or working in the senior living industry? Like, do you have any thoughts around what you've learned over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I've been you could say a product of a lot of working environments. Ever since I started school, I was always working, and I was working towards what I wanted to be in, which was marketing. But I also have learned a lot from those experiences, especially in the workplace as like a younger Gen Z person, and how that work environment made me feel. And ultimately, I think for a lot of younger individuals or college students, they want to be in an environment that supports their long-term goals, but then also meets some of the things in short term, meaning relationships with their coworkers. Is it an environment that's inviting, that is understanding of a generation that knows that technology is a very much an important conversation to have, but then also are the values actually aligned with this generation, being able to make sure that what they're doing has some sort of purpose and it's driven by that. And so I think senior living organizations have to constantly think about that, and think about ways where it's sometimes not always about the pay, and it's always not about like whether it's a title, but it's ultimately something where we feel like we've added some sort of positive contribution to the space, and approaching it that way would be the best way. And then I don't think it's ever like really stooping down or ever really making the language different or just cater to that. It's just a matter of communicating that this is a space that is important, that is filled with great people. And as you mentioned from our conversation before this, a lot of kind and caring and passionate people who just want to serve. And ultimately, I think that answers a lot of college students' like needs and purpose in a workplace environment.
Yeah. And I think back to my college years, I won't tell anybody how long ago that was, but it was just an industry like I didn't even know about. And like,
Yeah.
trying to find something that's purposeful and like you feel good at the end of the day. I think really senior living brings that up. And you talk about like the purpose and getting your story out there. And, I give you what I self-proclaiming you as like Mr. Content, especially like when it comes to TikTok. I think you do a fantastic job just kind of like sharing the stories or sharing like the ups and downs of starting a company, which, I've lost all my hair when we've done that for us. But I'm curious if because you talk about like communication, like kind of getting that story out and that purpose out. And do you think people in the industry, whether it's, the HR teams or sales and marketing, are missing out on an opportunity to showcase their story, whether on TikTok or like kind of doing it in a different way that's, against traditional norms?
I think one, thank you for the title, Mr. Content. I just think it's really funny sometimes that people have given me some sort of like hype towards what I've done in the past like 2 years when I've literally just like entered it. And I think that's the power of social media. And ultimately, if anybody who understands that and recognizes that should know that social media is a tool, it's a great platform. And whether you use LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram, you can't ignore it. And I don't think it's something you should just, put it on the side because it's one of those marketing, strategies you have to have. For me, what I think about in regards to senior living and how I do about our content and our videos and some of the things that we think about is it's almost like a mix of like, okay, how can we be like a borderline of like somewhat controversial, but almost like very passionate and caring, but then also like have this kind of like excitement to it that hasn't been seen before. And, it's a constant conversation I have actually with a few of marketing leaders in the senior living space, in the background of like, how do they enter it in a way that what is respectful of like obviously the residents and their members, but then also plays into what we all love to see when it comes to social media, like FOMO, and how do we hook a person to grab their attention. It's not just about like displaying their customer, but then how do you create a narrative and story around it. And I think ultimately any marketer in any industry should just think about it like that. It's an opportunity to share your story in a way that is, in a short form content way, but then also speaks to how we receive information now, right? And whether that's important, and whether that's like the way that you go about it should be very thoughtful. It's not just like you post something, maybe it is just like that, but I think it's important, and I think it's an important thing to think about when it comes to even attracting younger talent. And then also retaining them, right? I mean, if you have a senior living community or partner organization that's thinking about how they're revolutionizing or just thinking of a new way of doing their marketing, I think that would just be an interesting conversation and make it easier to have that conversation for those younger generations when they have to either bring in their parents or have that kind of thing. Now they have that backup information, right? Because you have TikTok and all these other things that are happening and that engages them. So those are just my thoughts on that. I don't know if that was the answer you wanted.
Yeah, no, I think I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's all about getting that story out, and it's creating in a way that people are absorbing information today. And I know you've had a few TikToks that have gotten like millions of views and stuff. And it's just really cool to see like how one person with their phone can really just, enhance it. Cause I think, right, the news loves to focus on the negative stuff, especially in senior living and stuff. But this is just a way to kind of control the narrative and show all the amazing stories and kind of the experiences that are happening in communities today. And speaking about,
I wanted to say on this, like, we have a lot of our friends who are currently going into this kind of trend of, I don't think it's a trend, to be honest with you, but they're going on this kind of route of creating, short form content. We see it, from other senior living partners I'm sure you worked with, who see the value in that. And it's ultimately not making it weird. As you've said, like if you make it awkward, it's awkward. But like ultimately what you're doing is, sharing the story and ultimately giving that opportunity for either the member, the staff, or the resident to, share that part of themselves. So I think that's ultimately what it does.
I love it. And, I want to jump back to Carevocacy because I know, it specializes, and you specialize, right, in teaching older adults technology. I've seen some of those TikToks as well, and I love to see the people in the communities get on some of those trends. But what do you think is like a misconception about older adults and technology?
When I first launched it, it was just me, right? Now we have a few set of team members that are all remote, and some are somewhat of a hybrid of in-person. But I guess when I first started, I was thinking, one, I knew that we weren't going to be able to help every single older adult. It had to be a particular psychographic of older adults who saw themselves wanting to learn something new. And so we wanted to make sure we worked with that and those who had that kind of environment to foster learning. And something I always found surprising in regards to like older adults and technology is that all of them or most of them actually want to learn technology or want to use technology, but it's because of the environmental factors or some sort of discouragement, either from, sometimes a loved one or just the way that they're portrayed in the media. And so what happens is that, a lot of our older adults or some of our learners are discouraged because of a other traumatic experience or someone that told them that they couldn't do it. And, but that's just not the actual thing that's happening as we work with our customers and our learners. A lot of them are very much excited and giving them opportunities to use technology, headphones or even iPhones or anything like that. Like those are opportunities for them to be almost like themselves, right? And if you limit that, it just kind of feels wrong. And so I think that's just the wrong stigma that we have around older adults and technology. And it's just ultimately changing those environments and then providing someone who actually wants to empower them and engage them. And ultimately, we want them to be healthier because of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you bring up some good points, right? Like you and I, because we're around the same age. I grew up with technology. I remember kind of like having computers in my elementary school and just have kind of seen it grow and evolve over time. So it's kind of been like self-taught, but like some of these people have kind of done it one way the entire time, but they need that empowerment. And like, no one's really been sitting there kind of like teaching them the best way. Or at least helping them be more effective. And I know if someone gets discouraged, right? Like even if I get discouraged on a piece of technology, I don't go back to it. It just is like, why would I spend time on that?
There's no one who's going to keep you accountable too, right? Like
Right.
who's gonna like remind you that this is something important for you to use. And
Exactly.
sometimes they just need that, right? So
yeah. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but has anything else surprised you when you're in terms of like teaching older adults about technology?
Again, everybody has a story to tell. Everybody's human, right? We think so. Everybody has a story to share. And I think sometimes, and not to make anything wrong, but sometimes a lot of older adults, live in these places, and sometimes their story is buried under the marketing, right? Or the I guess just the narrative, like what it feels like to be in senior living. But everybody has something to share. Every time we talk with one of our learners or customers, they talk about a piece of history in their life that they were involved in. And to me, immediately, like, let's turn that into something, right? Let's tell the world. And sometimes I feel like I'm nervous to ask them, but like they're very open to do it. As I said, like they just need a person, a care advocate, or somebody who would be willing to be able to give them that push. And another thing is, there's this huge conversation about making sure older adults are using technology so they can be more healthier and engaged in patients and stuff like that. And so those are the conversations we're having. And it's so funny sometimes in healthcare, we have this idea of like what we think older adults can handle, but then we come in and provide some sort of different perspective, and we show them how to use a portal or these things in healthcare that they want to use because that's how they can be more engaged. And so those are kind of the surprising things I bring up to payers or providers or communities. It's not more so really like the older adult. It's like I have to kind of also re-educate communities and systems that they are the individuals that want to use technology. And I think that's just the interesting thing that I've learned from them.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And in terms of like that re-education, especially like on the community side, and I think there's definitely an opportunity here, but I'm curious of your take of like, do you think it's a community's responsibility to help give tools or education or classes to help teach their residents about technology?
I think what some of the conversations we're having is to make sure there's some sort of digital literacy plan, right? Creating that around the older adult, because ultimately we want to take off that burden from either the staff, right, or the people that are involved in communities when someone asks them how to use this app or portal or whatever, right? And so I think communities should start thinking about digital literacy and creating plans and procedures or some sort of strategy around answering the needs of older adults in regards to technology. I think you shared one article with me of a community that's starting tech concierges and things like that to really answer those needs and those problems. And those are the conversations we're having now of how do we best help and serve those senior living communities. And it's ultimately creating a plan first, and then thinking of ways of how we can engage those residents, those members, and then executing on those, and then making sure we measure whether that person is actually benefiting from these classes, and then bringing up to the communities of like what that return is like. And then ultimately, I think it benefits the older adult because they can best communicate to the staff because now they have access and they know how to use a portal or an application or messaging, or even checking in anything, right? I'm sure, this is something that I've always seen is that a lot of older adults, like when they call in for dinner, or they always call in, right? But what if they could just go on their computer or laptop and make that reservation for when they do that dinner, right? Why you can take away that kind of extra step from the person who does the scheduling and all these other things when you can just access that application on their phone. So those are just kind of the things I've observed and see. And I don't know. We'll see. Maybe make more TikTok videos. I think ultimately is what senior living should do. Um, and, just share the narrative that, older adults are willing to learn if given the opportunity to learn and the engagement and empowerment to do so.
I love it. That's got to give you a mic to drop after that one, Stefano. I love that comment. But I do got one final question for you. Like knowing what you know now, like what 3 recommendations or insights would you give to either age tech founders, senior living providers, just people that are either thinking about the space, working about the space to help them navigate the next 12 to 18 months of their life?
I think everybody in this industry, whether it be age tech or aging or senior living, I think we're all open to partnering. I think that's how I think we'll grow in the next years, working with organizations, whether it be Eversound or us or innovations and other companies. Ultimately, I think that's what would drive us forward, because we all know we can't do it alone, right? We have to work with people. We have to see what they're working on and see how we can implement it for the community. And I think that's ultimately what's going to be beneficial for everybody in the space. Another recommendation, I guess, is, being more diverse in the set of voices in senior living. I think that ultimately is like a big thing for me personally as a Filipino and my background and just kind of where I stand in regards to senior living and what that looks like in senior living in America, right? And I think if we start thinking about diversity, but not just more of like whether they went to a different school, but just really a person who has a different upbringing and background, I think ultimately they can bring a lot to the table. And I don't mean not only in age, but also in race and in other places that would be really more promotive of diversity. And then I think it's, I think ultimately just making sure the senior or the resident or even the staff member is the hero of the story, right? Like how do we think about doing that, whether it be a simple TikTok video, and I'm sure you've seen that, because I always think about that, like how do we put other people first before us? And I think ultimately, if you're able to create content and put that hero in the front of the story first, I think that's ultimately what will help senior living organizations, age tech startups, whatever, making sure that who you're serving is always on the front of the page.
Amazing. I love it. Well, Stefano, I want to thank you for joining me today. I will tag you in this. So if anybody wants to reach out, they can definitely do that. But hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate our growing friendship and just, relationship and just partnership and, just rooting for you as much as I can. And I'm excited for you.
I think you should take a lot of the credit too. I think Matt, you're being very, very humble sometimes. But I think one, I appreciate you for what you do and just how you connect with people. And I think that's such a big value that no one really sees or talks about. I think they love the fun and energetic Matt, but ultimately you care. And I think that's what matters the most.
Well, this might be the first episode I actually cry on. So we're going to end it there. But thanks so much, Stefano. I appreciate you joining and your kind words.
Anytime. Thank you.